For thousands of years, humanity lived quietly on its blue planet, thinking the vast sky above was only stars, distant suns, and endless space. They built cities, dreamed of the future, and fought their own battles, never imagining that one day the galaxy would turn its eyes toward them. Far away, civilizations much older and more advanced than Earth existed. They had faster ships, weapons that used energy instead of bullets, and machines that seemed to defy the laws of nature. To them, Earth was small, unimportant, and fragile. When they finally discovered humanity, their reaction was not fear or respect. It was laughter. The first alien reports described humans as reckless, emotional, and physically weak compared to the armored species of the stars. Their weapons, too, seemed primitive. The aliens saw photographs of human warships made of steel, instead of living metal, of aircraft using fire and fuel instead of silent gravitic engines, and of tanks, heavy iron beasts with cannons and treads. To the galaxy, tanks were relics of a forgotten time. In their eyes, tanks were slow, noisy, and outdated. Why would anyone rely on machines that needed heavy fuel, that left trails of smoke, that shook the ground when they moved? The galaxies. Armies used silent hovercrafts and walking machines that glided over battlefields. They thought humans must be desperate, clinging to toys of war from centuries ago. The reports spread across star systems. The humans are backward. Their tanks are useless against us. But what they did not understand was the heart behind these machines. To humans, tanks were not just lumps of steel. They were shields, protectors, and symbols of power. Each tank carried a crew, often young men and women who trusted one another with their lives. Inside the cramped space of metal and wires, friendships turned into family. These crews trained not only with skill, but with determination. They knew their machines, every bolt, every gear, every sound the engine made. They trusted that when the time came, their tank would carry them through fire and chaos. The aliens, however, could not see this. They judged only by what their eyes showed them. Their mistake was simple. They thought strength came only from technology, not from the people who used it. They believed humanity would be crushed in days, maybe even hours, if it ever came to war. Their leaders told each other that Earth would be easy prey, that the humans would fall to their knees the moment they saw plasma weapons and war machines from the stars. And for a while, it seemed they were right. When the first alien fleets arrived in human skies, fear spread like wildfire. People looked up at ships larger than skyscrapers, their metallic skin glowing with strange colors. Cities trembled as energy beams lit up the night sky. Human governments scrambled, calling their militaries, preparing defenses, but even they doubted if they could stand against such a power. The aliens expected surrender. They expected Earth to beg for mercy. They expected human armies to crumble. And yet, something unexpected happened. Humanity did not surrender. They tightened their fists. They brought out every weapon they had, every soldier willing to fight. They called upon their tanks, the same machines the galaxy mocked, and rolled them out of their bases. To the aliens, the sight was almost amusing. These machines looked like crawling boxes of steel, carrying cannons that fired solid shells instead of beams of light. Compared to the silent alien war machines, human tanks looked like dinosaurs. But the humans did not laugh. They prepared. They fueled the engines, loaded the shells, and painted the sides of their tanks with symbols of hope, courage, and defiance. In villages and towns, people gathered to watch the tanks moving out. Children waved, elders prayed, families stood quietly as the earth shook with the thunder of treads. To them, these were not just machines. They were the guardians of their homes. Every tank that rolled forward carried the weight of human hope, the promise that they would not go down without a fight. And here was the first sign of underestimation. The aliens believed technology alone wins wars. But for humans, it was always about something deeper, the spirit to fight even when defeat seemed certain. The tanks became symbols of that spirit. The soldiers who rode inside them knew they were going against a force far stronger than themselves. Yet they did not step back. They whispered to each other, not about fear, but about protecting their land, their people, their Earth. When the first alien scouts landed on the ground, they expected silence. Instead, they heard engines. Instead of running, humans advanced. The tanks came rolling out of the dust, their cannons raised, their crews alert. The sound of steel on Earth filled the battlefield. It was the kind of sound the aliens had never heard before, the roar of machines built not for elegance, but for raw strength. At that moment, the aliens still smiled, thinking victory was certain. They thought these iron beasts would be destroyed in minutes. What they did not realize was that these machines had been tested in fire long before the galaxy arrived. Humanity had forged them through decades of wars, trials, and lessons. Every dent on their armor carried history. Every strategy their crews practiced came from generations of survival. The galaxy believed it was facing simple steel. But what they were truly facing was something far greater. The determination of humankind, carried forward by the thunder of tanks. The underestimation was already written. The aliens saw weakness where there was strength, foolishness where there was wisdom, and fragility where there was resilience. What they thought would be an easy conquest would soon turn into a story that shook the stars. This was only the beginning. The tanks were ready. The humans were ready. And soon, the galaxy would learn why underestimating Earth was the greatest mistake they had ever made. The world had been waiting for it. For weeks, strange lights had moved across the skies. At first, people thought they were comets or meteors, maybe even satellites. But the patterns were too precise, the movement too controlled. Then came the confirmation. They weren't natural objects. They were ships, massive ships. Humanity's first undeniable proof that they were not alone. The news spread faster than fire. Every screen, every radio, every conversation carried only one topic. People stood in the streets, looking up at the night sky, pointing at the strange glimmers that moved like stars but weren't. The governments of Earth called for calm, but calm was impossible. Some were afraid, some were curious, and some were excited. But in the hearts of those who had fought wars before, there was something else. Preparation. For years, humans had imagined first contact. Movies, books, stories had painted pictures of friendly meetings or terrifying invasions. Now it was no longer imagination. The first encounter was coming, and no one knew what form it would take. The alien fleet did not hide. Their ships descended, slowly, glowing with energy, their surfaces shining with colors that no human paint had ever captured. They seemed alive, almost breathing as they cut through the clouds. Cities fell into silence as shadows of enormous ships stretched across the land. To many, it felt like the sky itself had been stolen. At first, the aliens did not fire. Instead, they hovered, watching. It was as if they were studying humanity, measuring them, trying to decide if this world was worth conquering. Governments scrambled to make contact, sending messages of peace, of welcome, of curiosity. Scientists begged for a chance to speak to them. Leaders hoped that perhaps these visitors had come to share knowledge, not war. But deep inside military command centers, there was no illusion. Reports from scouts and satellites showed the truth. The ships carried weapons. Energy signatures were detected, powerful enough to flatten entire cities. The aliens weren't tourists. They were an army. The first direct encounter came in a quiet valley far from the great cities. The aliens chose it as their landing ground, perhaps believing it would avoid panic, or perhaps believing humans would not dare to confront them there. The valley was wide and silent, with forests on its edges and a river running through the middle. That morning, the mist had not yet lifted when the first alien craft descended. It touched the ground with a hum, light rippling across its surface. Inside, the nearby hills, human soldiers watched. They weren't scientists or politicians. They were the front line, ordinary people trained to protect their land. And among them were the tanks, old steel giants with scars of many years, engines rumbling, like beasts waking from sleep. The crews sat inside, checking instruments, whispering to one another, waiting for orders. The first alien warriors stepped out of their craft. They were taller than humans, armored in strange, glowing suits, their weapons humming softly in their hands. They moved with confidence, as if nothing could harm them. Their leader raised a device, scanning the area, probably expecting no resistance. And then the ground shook. From the forest line, the first human tank rolled forward, its cannon, aimed straight ahead. The sound was deep, heavy, and terrifying, the sound of steel crushing earth. More followed, their treads leaving trails in the soil, engines roaring louder with every second. Birds scattered, trees trembled, and for the first time, the aliens looked uncertain. The alien leader turned, raising his weapon, but before he could act, the first human shell fired. The explosion echoed through the valley, louder than thunder. The alien armor cracked, the shock wave shaking even the soldiers hiding behind their glowing shields. The aliens had expected surrender, maybe negotiations. They had not expected tanks. The battle that followed was not clean. Plasma fire cut through the air, burning the ground wherever it touched. But the tanks moved forward, their armor thick, their shells fast and relentless. One by one, alien suits were torn apart, their shields failing under the force of explosive steel. The humans inside the tanks fought with everything they had, sweat dripping, ears ringing, hearts pounding. But not once did they back down. For the people watching from the hills, it was like witnessing a miracle. The aliens who had arrived, like gods, who had seemed untouchable, were now stumbling, falling, breaking under the might of machines the galaxy had mocked. What was supposed to be an easy victory for the invaders had turned into chaos. But the first encounter was not only about battle, it was also about realization on both sides. For the aliens, it was the first moment they understood that humans were not what they thought. These primitive beings had weapons that could match their shields. Their machines, though noisy and heavy, carried a destructive power the galaxy had long forgotten. Most of all, the humans had something the aliens rarely saw anymore: raw courage. For the humans, it was the first moment they understood the scale of what they were facing. The alien weapons were deadly, their technology beyond anything Earth had seen. Every hit on a tank shook the crew inside to their bones. Every close call reminded them they were fighting something far greater than themselves. But in those moments, they also discovered something else. They could fight back. They were not helpless. The valley burned with smoke and fire as the battle dragged on. Tanks advanced through craters, their treads grinding over wreckage. Alien weapons tried to pin them down, but the humans adapted quickly, moving in groups, covering each other using the terrain like they had practiced countless times before. Every soldier, every tank crew member fought not just for survival, but for the entire planet. By the time the alien craft finally lifted off, retreating into the sky, the valley was unrecognizable. The ground was torn apart, trees reduced to ash, rivers clouded with smoke. But on that battlefield, humanity stood unbroken. The tanks, though scarred and battered, still rumbled with life. Crews emerged, covered in dirt and sweat, raising their fists in victory. It was not a total victory. Many tanks were lost, many soldiers gave their lives, but the message was clear: humanity would not fall easily. The first encounter had shown both sides the truth. The aliens now knew they faced a force they had underestimated. And the humans now knew they had the strength to stand, even against the stars. News of the battle spread across Earth within hours. People cheered in the streets, tears running down their faces. For the first time since the ships appeared, there was hope. Humanity could fight. Humanity could resist, and far away across the galaxy, messages were sent back to the alien leaders. Reports carried warnings. The humans are not weak. Their tanks are powerful. Their spirit is dangerous. The first encounter had changed everything. What was supposed to be a swift and simple conquest was now the beginning of a war the galaxy would never forget. The Valley battle had ended, but it was only the beginning. Humanity had surprised the invaders once, but everyone knew the aliens would not give up so easily. They had returned to the skies, but they would come back with more power, more ships, and a clearer plan. The whole world felt it in their bones. Another strike was coming. Yet something had changed after that first encounter. The fear that once gripped every home, every street, had started to break. For the first time in history, humanity realized it was not as weak as it had been made to believe. The tanks had proven that their machines, their strategy, and their courage could stand against even the most advanced weapons of the stars. But the truth was, the tanks were not humanity's only strength. What the aliens saw in the valley was only the surface. What they didn't know, and what they couldn't understand, was that humans had something hidden, something deeper than weapons or armor. In command centers across the world, leaders gathered, not to argue, but to cooperate. It was rare in human history for nations to stand side by side without rivalry, but now, with the planet itself at stake, differences began to fade. Scientists shared knowledge without hesitation. Generals shared tactics openly. Engineers from distant countries worked together as if they had trained under the same roof all their lives. The hidden strength was not a weapon, but unity. For centuries, humanity had struggled with division, different nations, beliefs, and systems. But now, when survival was at risk, they discovered the power of standing as one. It was messy, it was difficult, but it was happening. The aliens had expected to fight scattered tribes, but what they were now facing was a united world. While governments coordinated, ordinary people also revealed their hidden strength. Farmers turned their fields into supply bases. Factories that once built cars switched overnight to producing armored parts. Old mechanics, long retired, came back to teach young workers how to keep machines alive under impossible conditions. Every home, every town found a way to contribute. Humanity was not only fighting with soldiers, it was fighting with everyone. Secret underground labs. Scientists studied the remains of alien weapons left on the battlefield, burnt fragments of glowing metal, broken devices that had once been shields or scanners. These became keys to new knowledge. Though humans could not copy the technology fully, they could learn. Bit by bit, they discovered weaknesses, cracks in the alien design. They realized the alien shields, while powerful, drained huge amounts of energy. They realized the weapons. That seemed unstoppable overheated quickly when pushed too far. It was not much, but it was enough. The hidden strength of humans was also in adaptation. Unlike the aliens who relied on perfected systems and rules, humans were used to chaos. They had lived through wars, disasters, and countless struggles. Improvisation was part of survival. A broken tank could be patched with scrap metal. A missing part could be replaced with something entirely different. To the aliens, this seemed crude, but to humans, it was second nature. Deep in the forests and deserts, soldiers trained not only with their weapons, but also with their environment. They dug trenches, built camouflages, and turned landscapes into traps. Villages became fortresses overnight. Cities prepared evacuation routes, tunnels, and secret shelters. Even school students practiced drills, not out of fear, but with determination. They were preparing for a war that was no longer just the military's responsibility. It was everyone's, but perhaps the greatest hidden strength lay in the human. spirit itself. The aliens believed humans would break easily, that fear would shatter them, that chaos would make them surrender. Instead, they discovered something else. Humans carried stories, memories, and a will that could not be measured by machines. Soldiers went into battle carrying photographs of their families. Engineers worked through sleepless nights because they wanted a safer future for their children. Even in the darkest hours, people lit candles, sang songs, and promised each other that they would not let Earth fall. In the alien councils above the clouds, commanders debated. The reports from the Valley battle disturbed them. They had expected to crush a primitive race with little effort, but what they faced was far more dangerous. Their analysts studied human behavior, trying to find weaknesses, but instead they kept finding contradictions. Humans were fragile, yet they endured. They were divided, yet they united under pressure. They were less advanced, yet their weapons broke through shields. It made no sense. To the aliens, humans were an impossible species, and that impossibility was humanity's greatest hidden strength. Meanwhile, in underground hangars, the tanks that survived the first encounter were being repaired. Mechanics worked with steady hands, welding new plates, painting fresh armor. Each scar on the steel told a story of survival, and each repaired section carried a promise. The fight was not over. Crews sat beside their machines, cleaning weapons, whispering to one another about the battles ahead. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for every person waiting above ground, every child looking at the sky, every family hoping for peace. At night, the skies glowed with alien ships watching from above, but on the ground, humanity's fires burned brighter. Resistance cells formed in every region, ready to strike if the invaders landed again. Networks of communication spread faster than the aliens could track. Every corner of the Earth was alive with preparation. The hidden strength was everywhere, in unity, in adaptation, in spirit, and in the unbreakable will to survive. When the aliens finally decided to strike again, they thought they were ready. They had studied human weapons, calculated strategies, and prepared overwhelming force. But what they still did not understand was that humans were never just about numbers or technology. Humans carried something far more dangerous than advanced: machines, the will to keep fighting, no matter the cost. The night before the second great battle, a silence spread across the world. Soldiers stood ready, tanks lined in hidden positions, cities blacked out to avoid detection. People prayed. Others wrote letters. Some simply sat and stared at the sky. Fear was there, yes, but it no longer ruled them, because now they knew the truth. The first encounter had shown them that the aliens could bleed. The hidden strength of humanity, their unity, their adaptability, their spirit, would show them something even greater. Humanity was not just defending Earth. Humanity was teaching the galaxy a lesson it had forgotten: that courage and willpower could be stronger than any weapon. When the alien ships finally descended again, brighter and louder than before, they expected to find the same frightened world they had first approached. Instead, they found a planet ready to fight. And this time, humanity was not hiding its strength. The second wave came faster than anyone expected. The sky burned with alien ships, larger and darker than before. Their shadows stretched over cities, valleys, and oceans, reminding everyone that this battle was far from over. Humanity had prepared, as much as it could, but there was still doubt. Could they really face such power again? When the first blasts hit the ground, the earth shook. Entire hills crumbled, rivers boiled from heat, and towns disappeared under the fire of alien weapons. The invaders believed they were showing their true strength now, that this would be the final blow to crush resistance. But what they didn't know was that the second battle was destined to become the turning point. Hidden across the world, humans had prepared their defenses carefully. Underground bunkers carried command centers. Tanks were buried in camouflage, waiting for the signal. Planes sat ready on hidden runways, fueled and armed. For the first time in history, Earth's forces were not scattered. They were united. When the first alien strike hit, humanity did not collapse. Instead, it responded. Tanks rolled out of forests, steel monsters roaring to life. Their engines growled, their cannons flashed, and their armor gleamed with fresh battle scars. Artillery thundered from hidden positions, shaking the ground as shells flew into the skies. For the first time, human firepower met alien fire in equal force. The aliens were surprised. They expected humans to retreat again, to run and hide. Instead, they saw humans rushing forward, charging into the fire. They saw tanks refusing to stop even when their armor burned. They saw pilots flying through impossible storms of plasma just to deliver a strike. And in that moment, the invaders realized something had shifted. The turning point wasn't only about weapons. It was about spirit. Every human soldier knew what was at stake. There was no backup planet, no escape route, no second chance. Earth was their only home, and they would fight for it until the last breath. That determination spread like wildfire. Each act of bravery inspired another. A tank crew that refused to abandon their burning machine gave courage to an entire unit. A pilot who pushed his jet into the heart of the alien formation gave others the will to follow. Humanity was no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. In the middle of the chaos, something else began to unfold. The scientists who had studied the alien wreckage finally sent their discoveries to the battlefield. They had built crude but powerful devices, signal jammers that interfered with alien communication, modified shells that cracked through their shields, and new armor coatings that absorbed some of the plasma fire. These inventions were rough, imperfect, but they worked. For the first time, humans were not just defending, they were countering. The alien ships hesitated. Their formations broke. For centuries, they had crushed weaker worlds without challenge, but now they were facing a species that learned faster than they could predict. Every human mistake became a lesson. Every defeat became a strategy. Every loss became a reason to strike harder. The battle stretched across mountains and oceans. In one valley, tanks rolled forward under endless fire, refusing to stop. In the skies above, fighter jets danced between alien crafts, their trails painting lines of courage across the clouds. On the ground, soldiers ran through smoke and fire to hold their lines. It was chaos, but it was human chaos, the kind that had always carried them through history. And then came the moment that truly turned the tide. A massive alien command ship descended, its size so great that it blocked out the sun. It was the heart of the invasion, directing every movement, every strike. If it remained, humanity's resistance would eventually crumble. The soldiers on the ground knew this, but the ship's shields were impenetrable, or so the aliens believed. That was when the tanks came forward. Dozens of them, scarred and battered, but still rolling. They aimed their cannons not at the ground, forces, but at the sky. One after another, they fired with precision, their shells tearing through the air. At first, the blasts bounced harmlessly against the shields, lighting the sky with sparks. But the tanks did not stop. They fired again and again, their barrels glowing red, their crews shouting through smoke and fire. The scientists' modifications began to show results. With each strike, the shield flickered just for a second. Soldiers cheered, pilots dove in, and the combined force of Earth's weapons rained down on the massive ship. Sparks became cracks, cracks became fractures, and finally, with one last devastating barrage, the shield shattered like glass. The alien command ship, once thought invincible, now stood exposed. That was the moment the world changed. Humanity had broken the enemy's strongest protection. For the first time, the aliens were vulnerable. A roar of hope spread across battlefields. Soldiers shouted, civilians listening on radios wept with relief, and commanders gave the order, "Strike with everything." Jets soared in, dropping payloads directly into the ship's hull. Tanks fired relentlessly, their shells punching deeper. With each hit, missiles streaked through the air, finding their mark. Explosions ripped through the giant vessel, fire pouring from its wounds. And then, before the eyes of the entire planet, the alien command ship fell from the sky. It crashed into the earth with a thunder that shook mountains. Dust and flames rose into the heavens. For a long moment, there was silence. And then the cheers began. Humanity had not only survived the second wave, it had struck back, and it had won a victory that no one thought possible. The aliens, stunned and broken, pulled back. Their formations collapsed. Their ships fled into the skies, leaving behind wreckage and defeat. For the first time in the war, they were the ones retreating. Humanity had turned the tide, but the victory was not only in the battlefield. Across the world, people realized what had happened. The fear that once controlled them had disappeared completely. Now they had proof that the invaders could be beaten. Now they had proof that humanity was not weak. It was powerful, determined, unstoppable. The turning point was not just the fall of a single ship. It was the rise of a belief that humanity could win this war. That they were not fighting for survival anymore, but for freedom, for pride, and for the future. That night, as fires still burned and soldiers rested beside their tanks, the world felt different. The sky was scarred, the ground was broken, but the spirit of humanity was stronger than ever before. In alien councils far beyond Earth, panic spread. Reports came in about their defeat, about the fall of the command ship, about the strange resilience of humans. The commanders argued, confused, and frustrated. They had underestimated this species once, and now they faced a truth they could not ignore. Humans were not prey. Humans were a force, and the galaxy would never forget the moment humanity turned the tide. The dust from the fallen command ship had barely settled when the world began to realize what had just happened. The ground was still broken, cities were scarred, and smoke rose into the sky like dark memories of what they had faced. But through all that destruction, one truth shined brighter than anything else. Humanity had stood its ground, and the invaders had retreated. For the first time in centuries of hidden fear, the galaxy had witnessed something unexpected. A species, once dismissed as fragile, had shaken the very balance of power. But even in victory, something deeper lingered. The legacy of fear. For generations, humans had feared the unknown. Fear of the stars, fear of what might come from above, fear of being too small in an endless universe. That fear had shaped them quietly, making them cautious, making them dreamers, and making them survivors. It had forced them to build walls, to prepare for storms, to study the skies. It was this long shadow of fear that had prepared them for the invasion, even without knowing it. But now, things had changed. The legacy of fear was no longer a weakness. It had turned into a strength. Every lesson written in history, every struggle humanity had survived, wars, disasters, hunger, and conflict, had left behind scars. And those scars carried wisdom. Humanity's fear of losing everything had forced them to value everything. Their fear of destruction had made them build with courage. Their fear of being crushed had made them stronger than the enemy could ever imagine. On the battlefields where tanks still stood, covered in ash and flame, soldiers looked at one another and understood what they had done. They had not only defended their world. They had rewritten what fear meant. Fear was no longer something that made them hide. Fear was something that pushed them forward, that gave them the power to fight even when the odds were impossible. Across the world, people gathered in broken cities. Families lit fires in the ruins, not out of despair, but as a sign of survival. Children who had once trembled at the thought of alien ships now looked at the night sky with different eyes. They no longer whispered about monsters from the stars. They spoke about how their people had fought back, how tanks, planes, and brave soldiers had turned fear into firepower. Stories began to spread, carried from town to town, village to village, about how humanity had made the invincible bleed. The legacy of fear had become the seed of unity, but the fear had not vanished completely. In alien councils light years away, that same fear now lived in the hearts of the invaders. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they had retreated. Their generals spoke in hushed tones about the humans. They described tanks that rolled through fire, soldiers who refused to break, and a planet that turned its terror into defiance. The invaders had always relied on fear to control their victims, but now they carried that fear within themselves. The galaxy had changed forever. Other civilizations, hidden in the dark, had been watching. Many weaker species, once too afraid to resist, now whispered the name of Earth with hope. If humans could fight back, then perhaps they could too. Fear, which had once silenced them, now began to stir courage. On Earth, leaders gathered to decide what would come next. The war was not over. The aliens would return. Everyone knew it, but humanity was no longer the same species that had once looked at the stars with only dread. They were ready, not just with weapons, but with belief. The legacy of fear had given them a new kind of strength, the strength to imagine victory. Scientists continued their work with the wreckage, studying every piece of alien technology. They no longer worked in secret. Now they worked openly, with the support of an entire planet behind them. Engineers built stronger tanks, faster jets, and weapons that could reach beyond the skies. Farmers and workers gave what they could because everyone felt they were part of something bigger. Humanity was no longer divided by borders or rivalries. The invasion had burned away those lines. The legacy of fear had unified them in a way nothing else could. Soldiers who had fought in the great battle became symbols of resilience. Their tanks, scarred and burned, were left standing in city squares as reminders of what had been achieved. Children climbed on them, tracing their fingers over the dents and holes, hearing the stories from elders about the day humanity turned fear into fire. Monuments were built, not to glorify war, but to honor courage. People wanted to remember, not to forget, because they knew forgetting would mean repeating the same mistakes. The legacy of fear taught them vigilance. Humanity could not return to the days of being blind to the sky. They now watched the stars not with dread, but with readiness. Telescopes, satellites, and defense stations were placed in orbit. The next time the invaders came, Earth would not be caught off guard. This was no longer a planet waiting to be saved. It was a planet preparing to protect itself and others. The invaders, meanwhile, carried their own scars. Their leaders spoke of humans in meetings filled with silence and unease. They had believed fear was their greatest weapon, but fear had betrayed them. They now lived with the memory of a world that did not break, a species that did not kneel. The humans had shown them something terrifying. Courage in the face of fear was more powerful than fear itself. The galaxy would remember. Stories of Earth would spread far beyond the solar system. Some would call them dangerous, some would call them heroes, but no one would ever again call them weak. The tanks that rolled across burning fields, the soldiers who stood when all seemed lost, the people who turned fear into defiance, these would become legends, and legends have their own kind of power. The night sky over Earth was still scarred by the fire of battle, but it no longer looked threatening. People gazed upward and saw not only the reminder of destruction, but the promise of survival. They knew the war was not finished, but they no longer carried the same kind of fear. Instead, they carried determination. The legacy of fear was not about trembling. It was about remembering, preparing, and never letting the shadows of the past control the future. It was about teaching future generations that fear could either break you or build you, and humanity had chosen to be built by it. In the end, the aliens had come believing fear would make humanity fall. Instead, it had made them rise. That was the legacy they left behind. A legacy written not in silence, but in thunder. Not in surrender, but in defiance. And though the stars above still held unknown dangers, humanity now looked at them with steady eyes. Fear would always exist, but now it belonged to the invaders,